Hello. Welcome to my channel Touching Stories. You're about to hear an amazing story about love and unexpected decisions. Enjoy watching. 3 years ago, Nina was packed into town with her whole family. Chad and Anna related. The grandfather and grandmother girls themselves wrapped her homemade cakes for the trip and hid their meager savings in her purse. "Grandma, please don't," Nina persuaded me in between, trying to hand back some big bills. "I've been working all summer at the cowmaker, remember? This money should be enough for the first month." "That's for sure, and then maybe I'll get a new job and I'll send you and Grandpa more money. You'll see." Nina smiled at her grandmother with a direct, slightly childish smile. She was only 18 at the time. "Oh, God forbid," Granny answered, and she quietly put the proverbial money back in her purse. "But you know, my dear, anything can happen on the road, and when you come to town with the girls, they will also need all the time to keep your ears open. So an extra penny won't do you any harm." Nina's grandfather Chad put his heavy hand on his granddaughter's shoulder. He had worked all his life at the local factory. So even now, being a man already in his old age, he remained very strong and physically sturdy. "Listen to me for a minute," he began his homily. "Now you've turned into a beautiful young girl. I don't blame you for going to town. I have to admit that in our village there are few prospects for young people to realize their potential. So if you're lucky and you'll be able to somehow get a hold of this very capital, my grandmother and I only rejoice with all my heart. Honestly," Grandpa stretched out with a smile, "I know exactly what you're getting at. But you can be sure I don't need guys in the big city. I need a good job and an opportunity to develop as a professional. And if you think I'm going to be out clubbing from morning till night, you can rest assured." "Why do you keep interrupting me? What kind of habit is that?" "That's not what I meant. The city is not the countryside, granddaughter. You have to be careful there every step of the way. Not only is there enough temptation there besides rich men, but there are other things too." "What are you talking about, Grandpa?" "What don't I understand?" Nina asked me again. "In the city, any man won't let go of what he wants, and people there don't shrink from betrayal. Not even sneaky, overt. You should always look 2 steps ahead when you meet a new person. Otherwise, you know what can happen." Nina immediately stopped smiling and lowered her eyes. She understood perfectly well what her grandfather meant, but she preferred not to think about the bad things. "Well, let's sit for a while," Anna suggested, to defuse the situation a little, and all 3 of them immediately sat down on the bench in the hall. A minute later, the grandfather and grandmother kissed their granddaughter on both cheeks, and Nina jumped out into the street, happy as hell, despite the fact that the small suitcase was filled to the brim, and it was terribly heavy. To think she would finally see the capital with her own eyes. Not only that, now, after saying goodbye to her loved ones, the girl Esmeralda D. keenly realized that she had become an adult. Childhood was over with a slight sadness, thought for a moment Nina, but in the next minute her heart beat happily. "I'm an adult now, and I can control my own life. I can be anything I want." At the bus stop, her best friends Miranda, Veronica, and Viola were waiting for her. The latter was dressed for the trip, as if she were going straight from the train to the disco. "Here I am, girls," Nina waved cheerfully. "So, are you ready to conquer the capital?" "Of course," I answered while chewing gum. "Veronica and Miranda are always ready, and we've already planned what we're going to do when we arrive." She and Viola looked at each other meaningfully. But good-natured Nina did not pay attention to this gesture. The girl only stared at her friends curiously. "Didn't we want to look for a place to stay first? Or should we look for apartments right away, so that we could all live there together? I understood that the first thing to look for in the city was a job and a roof over our heads before we could go out and get tickets for excursions." Viola woke up laughing. She couldn't help herself. "What excursions, Nina?" Miranda and I wanted to hit a nightclub first thing. They say it's always the capital's finest on Sundays. All the Golden League guys will be there. How could I miss such a great chance? She looked at Viola without understanding. Her grandfather's warning that in a big city friendship can be easily replaced by rivalry and even enmity. Girls, that's not what we agreed to, Nina said. Miranda doesn't mean that we're just going to leave you in the middle of the station. Come with us to the club. You'll see how the capital's people party on weekends. Nina blushed with shame. She had promised her family not to get involved in dubious adventures. And then, what happened? She had no sooner stepped out of the doorway than she jumped right in, didn't she? No, that's not the kind of pastime in the capital she signed up for. If you've decided for yourself that you will look for work and build your new life brick by brick, then stick to the plan. Different clubs and promising acquaintances. It's all frankly frightened the young and innocent girl. At that moment, Nina's musings were interrupted when a bus pulled up. He pulled up next to an old iron bus stop. "Get in, girls." Viola shouted to her friends and flashed down the steps into the bus. It was particularly silent all the way into town. The other girls realized at once. Nina was disappointed in them. She'd thought they'd do everything the smart way. But here, Veronica, Miranda, and Viola, however, had always cared little for the opinion of their younger friend. Among the three of them, Nina was the most correct, and in the opinion of the other two girls, that correctness only spoiled it, turning it into nerdiness. The most interesting thing was that it was her friends who had persuaded Nina to go to town with them. They promised her that Nina would find her dream job there. Of course they would help her with everything. Of course the girl had been thinking about such an opportunity for a long time. But it was only now that she was certain of her choice. Too many circumstances in her life came together in such a way that the move was an ideal continuation of Nina's plans for her own development. The girl certainly wanted to achieve in the capital of something significant, to take a good and at the same time, importantly, responsive to her inner mood of the place. However, reality, as is often the case, was to the young provincial unfair harsh. Miranda and Viola easily found a prestigious job in an office located in one of the city's largest business centers. It should be said that the girls from the very beginning had their own plan, which they did not consider it necessary to inform poor Nina. Both girlfriends did not even think about the fact that they would not be able to settle in the capital. After all, Miranda and Viola had asked their parents to call some acquaintances in the city. Girls hoped to stay with them for some time and at the same time to find a much-desired job. As a result, they became good friends. Now they worked as office managers and secretaries, respectively. But they left it to Nina to get out of the whole situation as she wished. Girls, how could it be? I was amazed at the coolness of my friends. Nina, you promised that we would help each other in everything. Who told you such nonsense? Viola said with a chuckle, looking in her pocket mirror and fixing her fancy eyeshadow. We promised we wouldn't leave you at the station. We'll go to the center together. And then it's up to you how you want to proceed. 3 long years had passed since then, and there was no sign of Veronica, Miranda, or Viola. Nina never heard from her again. She had to go through a lot of difficulties herself before she could find a decent place to live and a job. Naturally, a girl without higher education and minimal connections in the capital probably did not rush to take a good place. At most, she was offered a job as a janitor in a supermarket or a night job at the FAS. Things of cardboard and paper waste for recycling. Realizing that none of these positions could give her what she dreamed of, Nina refused every time. Well, then it's up to you, they told her in the personnel department. Only keep in mind that with your paltry competence and experience in the farm in Moscow, it is unlikely that anyone will take you even for the position of a simple manager. After all, you need to have more knowledge and look accordingly. Nina, in such cases, blushing with embarrassment, nodded her head. She is not wearing branded or fashionable clothes, but they are clean and almost new. However, her employers, catching her indignant look, only responded with irony. It can't be helped. Here we are largely greeted by the clothes and the color of your diploma. And then, if you really are a good specialist, they offer you a good job and a salary. God only knows how many tears I shed at night. Nina, before finally coming to terms with the fact that she is in the capital, probably without help will not be able to get out of this part of what has always so passionately dreamed of. If only it were possible to get at least some qualifications for free. But in all the retraining centers where she applied to, the girl always required a Moscow residency. Where would she get such a registration? But the same modern courses in sewing or mastering electronic document management, they simply do not have money. So the circle, as they say, closed. When a girl came to the terrible line beyond which begins hunger, total lack of money, Nina realized it was time to act decisively. She had to live on something, whether you wanted to or not. Especially since the money was handed to her when her grandfather said goodbye, and her grandmother was inevitably coming to an end. Very soon, Nina began not even have enough money to pay for her tiny room, which she rented from an elderly woman in not the most favorable area of the capital. Opening a newspaper free ads, in desperation, Nina immediately stumbled upon a vacancy for a dishwasher in a major Moscow restaurant. Deciding to try her luck, the girl went for an interview, and to her great surprise, she was almost immediately accepted. Probably did not ask her if she had a residence permit. And when Nina admitted that she was from the village, the director, on the contrary, was even happy about it. You can't imagine what a blessing it is to talk to a simple man who isn't tempted by the temptations of the big city. An imposing-looking man in a business suit told her, "Now you know any city dweller agrees only to fat salaries and high positions. And meanwhile, someone has to do the most mundane routine work. The position of dishwasher's helper does not shine with career opportunities." I agree, but it's a stable job and the money you'll always get on time. The director said something else, but Nina didn't listen to it anymore. The most important thing was that now she would have money. It meant that she would not have to once again wander around the corners, looking for the cheapest accommodation, and she could at least for a while breathe easy. And now she was 21 years old. She still works as a dishwasher in the same restaurant as 3 years ago. The work, however, did not cause the girl any particular negativity. Nina performed her duties well and was always friendly to other colleagues. The only problem for her was the wife of the restaurant owner, Inessa. The woman openly disliked the young provincial, for some reason believing that she had her eye on her husband. This, of course, had nothing to do with reality. Only a couple of times he politely greeted her and praised her work. When he came to visit his restaurant, however, his wife, being insufferably jealous, managed to turn everything upside down. "Listen to me, you little lefty bitch," whispered once in Nina's face, sandwiched somewhere between the kitchen and the back of the staff room. "If I ever see you near my husband again, you're dead. Inessa, I don't know what you mean." The dishwasher looked at her with amazed eyes. "You think I don't see the way you look at him?" The woman squinted her eyes angrily. "It's the only way people like you come here to run after other people's men, that if you look like an innocent little angel, you can open your redneck mouth on other people's things now." She should not have been outraged at that. But the girl was well aware that if she said one word against Inessa, she would immediately lose her only job. "I assure you, Inessa, I am in no way interested in your husband. I swear." Apparently, Nina at that moment had such a sincere expression that the wife of the owner of the restaurant softened a little. She let the girl go. "Know that I'm watching you, little one. And if you keep sneaking around my Jacob, then..." Inessa went on to fill the poor woman with such profanity that she was ashamed to even stand in front of her. It was clear that this woman had her whole world wrapped up solely in one goal: to keep her husband by any means, even the most unsightly ones. Firing some dishwasher was a matter of course for her. When Nina moved to Moscow, she made a kind of promise to herself never to fall in love again, all because it was an unhappy love strengthened in her desire to finally leave her native village. So even if Jacob had suddenly decided to show any interest in her, Nina would have unequivocally turned him down. Nina loved Mickey more than life. They had known each other since childhood and had dreamed of getting married ever since they were both 12. At first they were just friends, like all kids. Their age are friends, running after each other, trying to get stuck in a popular game, exchanging colorful calendars from their personal collections. Then, in an instant, everything changed. Mickey transformed into a tall, blond young man whose blue eyes were completely devoid of free will. She was ready to follow him to the ends of the earth and do anything to please him and please her lover. Mickey felt the same way. But his feelings were not as strong as the little girl, and later the young girl had hoped. Seeing the devotion and love, Nina looked into his eyes. The boy could not imagine that anyone could love him as much, if not more, than Nina loved him. "I'll be waiting for you from the army," the girl assured him. "I won't be friends with anyone else. I won't go to discos. I'll only love and wait for you. We'll get married when you come back, right?" She looked hopefully into the eyes of the boy. "Let's get married," Mickey answered her. He hurried to lower his eyes. "You just breathe. Don't forget while you're writing me letters, okay?" Mickey smiled. And Nina's heart went a few more beats than it needed to. Well, he couldn't tell her that the promise he had made to the girl years ago, when he had just turned from a child to a real teenager, no longer had the power and meaning to him as he had once thought. However, to avoid upsetting her before he left for the army, Mickey did everything he could to make sure Nina didn't guess anything about it. It wasn't until Mickey returned and the first thing he did was go not to her, but to Marinette, the daughter of a rural farmer named Michael. Nina suspected that something terrible had happened. The girl well remembered running across the field barefoot in her simple sandals she had lost somewhere along the way, and picking them up was almost physically impossible. Nina suddenly felt that between her and Mickey, the thin silver thread of that attachment of childhood friendship of love, which had connected them all these years, was torn. When she got home, she couldn't find her place. Everyone was stomping around. She tried to look in the windows of the big bright hut. At the time, the girl did not care how much she would humiliate herself in the eyes of the village crowd. The only thing that interested Nina at that moment was whether her worst assumption was true. Nina wandered around the house. Suddenly, something burned her soul from the inside. Obeying some instinct, the girl moved toward the farmer's barn when she heard a quiet girl's laughter, and then the sound of passionate kisses. "Mickey," Nina muttered as she watched her fiancé hold Marinette tightly in his arms. The shirt on the farmer's daughter was pulled down to the middle of her back. So there was absolutely no doubt in Nina's mind that it was over between her and Mickey from now on. "Ninka!" Mickey exclaimed and hurriedly pulled his shirt back on in the light. "Wait, you've got it all wrong. We need to talk." "What's there to say now?" Nina asked him again, and in her eyes at the same time large tears were rolling up on their own. "I just can't understand one thing. Why did you promise to marry me if this girl is more important to you?" Marinette pretended not to understand what Nina was suffering here. She rolled her bright green eyes, said Nina with a snide smile. "Are you still doing tragedy for the whole village here? We had Shakespeare in the 10th grade and he didn't like it. Remember, if you want to know, all this year he wrote me such letters." I couldn't sleep after that either. Marinette laughed with the wild laugh of a forest mermaid who lures random travelers into her net that way. She couldn't figure out what it was that attracted all the guys to her. Marinette was confident, uninhibited, and had no moral boundaries whatsoever. Combined with her unbridled beauty, any normal man should have lost his head next to her. Any man. But not Mickey. "Stop it," Mickey sassed her friend. "I should have told you a long time ago before I was going to join the army." The boy was visibly embarrassed, not knowing what would be the right words to say in this situation. "Anyway, me and Marinette, we're getting married in 3 months. We've been going out together for a long time. Tomorrow we'll take the application to the registry office in town. But I don't love you anymore. Nin, you have to understand." The guy grabbed his head. "We are very different. I need a girl that burns me from the inside out like fire. And you're just a kid, Nin." Mickey wanted to give the girl a fatherly hug, to pity her. But he only shook his hands roughly from his shoulders. "Don't touch me." "How could you do this to me, Mickey? You just touched her with those hands. Don't start instinctively scrubbing herself on the shoulders, as if she were trying to flick herself off 100 little pieces of insects." "Yes, leave Mickey alone, leaning on his shoulder." "Marinette, can't you see? A seizure? It's a good thing you decided to marry me. You made the right choice." With those words, Marinette kissed her fiancé on the lips. They are not able to watch this instantly, all wrinkled, as if she was rolled with ice water, and then sobbing at the top of their throats. She raced back with all the speed her skinny little legs were capable of. That's when she decided to pack her suitcase and leave for Moscow with Miranda and Viola. From the moment she left the farmyard, Nina never remembered Mickey again. Her heart could not calmly accept the fact that the man she loved so much, devoted wholeheartedly, had exchanged her for a voluptuous beauty, betrayed her with the same ease as if he had to throw away his old shoes to put on the new ones he had bought long ago and in advance. The saddest thing about the whole situation was that the poor girl had no one to share the pain of her shattered heart with. That's because she hadn't managed to make any new friends over the years of her life in the capital. Colleagues do not count. And Nina had no other relatives except her elderly grandparents, who at that time were already in a fairly advanced age. You could say that Chad and Anna replaced her parents. Her mother died in childbirth, giving life to Nina herself. All that remains is her memory. The girl has a few color photographs in which her mother was depicted very young and impossibly beautiful. As for her innocent father, he disappeared years ago. The man wanted to go to the big city to work, just as Nina herself did now. But unlike her daughter, who stayed in touch with her loved ones and regularly called and visited her grandparents, her father disappeared somewhere. She was about 7 years old at the time, so she managed to remember the image of him, his kind face and dark brown eyes. Her daughter would know him today out of 1,000 similar faces. Grandpa and Grandma decided that your grandfather drank himself to death under a fence somewhere, got mixed up with bad company, and that's the result. That's what they said. So I thought to myself, then Nina, that her father was an orphan and never knew his own blood relative. Donald then disappeared all too suddenly. And Nina, to her great regret, allowed the thought that Dad was probably the victim of some violent crime. Her last memory of her father was that he had given her grandfather an antique mechanical alarm clock for his birthday, which Chad had never let go of. Take it with you even to work. Richly decorated with copper carvings, folded into an intricate, animalistic, pagan pattern by the swollen, as if protruding over the entire steel iron part of the glass. The alarm clock was my grandfather's dearest and most beloved gift. The graceful hands on the dial always showed the exact time. Chad was very particular about making sure that the mechanism of his alarm clock did not fill up or rust in any way. Grandfather was basically a big fan of all kinds of mechanized products. And to Donald's great good fortune, he flatly refused to accept fancy electronic clocks. How many times has she asked her grandfather to finally buy herself a fitness bracelet with a built-in watch to monitor her health? But Chad chose to take a no-holds, barred position here. What do I need these 4 things of yours for? And her granddaughter asked her irritably and persuaded the girl. Grandfather of me any reconnaissance on them. At once. Do I need it? No. Freedom comes first. I've been walking my whole life with my mechanical parts, and I will continue to do so. And no service will ever catch me. What if Hugh Donald decided to be a spy in his old age? Grandma Anna joked at the time. Oh, shut up. It's better anyway. You don't understand anything, brushed aside his wife. This is life itself, caught in the metal. You see the logic. And what is all this artificial intelligence of yours? Is it a mundane? One entertainment for those who are interested in showing their lives through a number. It was after Nina's father gave Donald such an original gift. He went to the big city hoping to earn money for the family. And the rest of his fate, alas, remained only to be guessed. That day at the restaurant, the famous all over the city children of millionaires were celebrating their wedding. 2 influential families staged a lavish celebration as a son and daughter from both sides tied their lives together. The 25-year-old Alexander is the heir to the owner of a popular franchise in the capital. He married Violetta, the daughter of an oil tycoon. The entire restaurant that night was literally on the ears of the administrator, and the waiters were running all over the kitchen and not tired of giving numerous orders, cooks and helpers. The wedding was supposed to be a kind of a star hour for the whole place. Up to that moment, they had never before hosted such high-profile guests on their premises. The whole color of the capital elite gathered there. And here and there, the faces of people who occupied very important posts in the government flashed. That is why the administrator of the hall was rushing around the whole kitchen, trying to motivate all the other employees in this way. Daisy, why aren't the scallops ready yet? Do you even look at your watch? What am I paying you so much money for? You can't even make some stupid scallops just in time. The receptionist's face was as red as a well-flopped cancer. Poor Chief Daisy, who actually did her internship in Paris. And how she probably knew exactly when to sell scallops that night. It was like she was numb with fear, unable to resist the arrogance and stubbornness of the receptionist. Johnny, what's with the dessert? I was wondering if the newlyweds' wedding cake had arrived yet. Johnny is the best pastry chef in town and the winner of several professional culinary awards. The soldier shrugged his shoulders before answering no. But I called the agency, and they said that the cake would definitely be here in half an hour. What's half an hour? What's taking so long? The administrator wanted to shout something else to the pastry chef. Just then, for her trouble, Nina came into the kitchen from the hall, a whole mountain of dirty dishes in her hands, which she obligingly took from her hands. Don't tell me you went out into the common room. Please. A big blue vein deflated on the receptionist's forehead. Nina had to answer quietly. I only went to the very edge of the wall. That's where the girls are already falling down. There are so many plates to take down to the sink. So I volunteered to help. What are you, completely? Fool, Nina roared a wounded tiger administrator. All of the people there are busy doing their own things. Some are dancing, some are drinking. The girl tried to justify herself. They didn't even notice me. You didn't notice. You said your teeth were as white as sharks before you cast. Girl, tell me, do you know we're having a high-class event here? People like you shouldn't even be pointing their noses in the hall. You'll scare away all the guests just by looking at you. What'll they write about us in the newspapers? But what about the dishes? Nina tried to interject. Shut up when you're being talked to. He lost all patience. Now leave all the dishes in the sink immediately and go out of my sight, and out of the sight and out of the sight of my guests, to the back room and sit there until the end of the event. And then, when all the most important guests are gone, only then will you be able to wash all the dishes to shine, down to the smallest tea plate. But not before. Do you understand me? Nina nodded in horror and was at a loss at first, forgetting where she was supposed to go in the first place. Finally, the girl carefully put the huge pile of plates in the large stainless steel sink and was about to ask to be kicked out to the staff room when the kitchen door swung open again, unexpectedly. So much for the noise, and there was no fight. The smiling groom flew into the kitchen and lit up her entire space with his own such a radiant and kind smile. Nina involuntarily admired the groom, turning around at his voice. Alexander was tall and trim, but most importantly, he had simply stunning energy and charisma. It was he who came up with the idea of doing all the wedding contests himself, thus saving him the expense of a pompous photo mod. The guy was absolutely confident in his abilities and therefore entertained the guests no worse than some famous showman from Central Television. "Alexander, dear, what are you doing here?" The receptionist, with an instant change of face, stretched out in a faint voice. "It's not as festive here as in your big company. I'm sorry, the cost of production." The administrator laughed energetically, like some villain in the movies. However, he realized in time and suppressed the attack. Inappropriate in such a situation of laughter. "I see you're all in a cheerful mood today." I'm smiling. "Don't you want to participate with everyone else in the contests? I want all the employees to take their minds off their work for a while and just relax a little bit. Our guest's wish is law." Instantly, the receptionist reacted and clapped his hands loudly. Everyone, stop what you're doing and go into the hall." We were invited in by the newlyweds quickly, when almost everyone had left the kitchen. The dishwasher hesitantly approached the receptionist. "Can I come too? Or is it better to stay in the back room?" "Are you out of your mind?" The groom said we're all going. "So you're in too? What could be wrong with that?" Nina nodded and followed the others out. Before she did so, she managed to get her hair out of its bundle and back under her neat and clean work headscarf. The contests, conducted by Alexander, were characterized by a pleasant variety and complete absence of even the slightest hint of lewdness and vulgarity. Everybody, including staff in the restaurant kitchen, was offered to try their hand at karaoke on volume. A contest to see who could hit the highest note. To run around the hall in silk sacks, hoping to take a bite of a corny pie or try to guess a few old Russian riddles, which the groom himself specially picked up from books for today's festivities. And now, since we're having a wedding, Alexander smiled and winked at the guests. "I want to try to offer all married couples or just couples in the status of lovers to participate in one unusual contest." Nina sat closer to the stage. Of course, she could not participate in this contest for obvious reasons. However, she was very interested to see what the groom had invented for all those present. He took an unusual clock out of his pocket, which, from a distance, looked more like an antique mechanical alarm clock. "Here, and I'm going to set this charming alarm clock for a certain time, let's say 5 or 7 minutes." With these words, the groom began to wind the antique mechanism. There was a distinctive sound, and then it seemed to Nina that she had definitely heard something similar. And just recently, the couples who agreed to participate would have to hold their kisses exactly until the alarm clock rang. Alexander announced solemnly and loudly. Understanding laughter and approving murmurs erupted in the crowd. Yes, we don't refuse friends, and no refusals are accepted anyway. And what did you think? We'll be the only ones kissing tonight. The groom has finished winding up the alarm clock. At that time, 5 or 6 couples arrived on the stage. The men and women were clearly shy about kissing in public, though their cheeks were burning with anticipation of the pleasure itself. "All right. On your mark, get set. Here we go," shouted and released the counting timer of the alarm clock. All the contestants kissed in a flash. Someone was doing it modestly, just pressed against the cheek of his beloved. and some of the younger guests sought, on the contrary, to emphasize the raging passion in them. One way or another, the sight did not look repulsive. What pleasantly surprised Nina. The audience along the way was very cultured after all. At one point, Alexander walked past the table where Nina was sitting, or that the girl was able to get a better look at the current clockwork of the alarm clock that showed itself in the hands of the groom. No cheating. More passion. Why do you cling so tightly to your spouse, as if you wanted to drink all the blood out of her? The audience laughed in unison. And at that moment, Nina had goosebumps running down her back. The thing is, the alarm clock, which the groom used for his competition, was an exact copy of the one her own father once gave to her grandfather. But where did the rich guy get such an unusual item? Could it have anything to do with Nina's father? And if so, how could Nina herself begin to untangle this strange tangle? The girl stared at this alarm clock as fascinated, and did not even immediately realize that at the same time Violetta quietly opened to her Alexander's beautiful bride. The character of this lady, however, was rumored to be very powerful and feisty. And of this, Nina had the displeasure of being convinced in a few seconds. "Hey, chicken, what did you like about him?" Nina didn't even realize at once that this was addressed to her with difficulty, breaking away from contemplation of the alarm clock. The girl turned her head to the unkindly smirking bride, as at the same moment the heartbreaking trill of the very same alarm clock rang through the hall. "Damn, what is it?" the bride exclaimed forcefully, clasping her hands over her own ears. "It sucks, but even a dead man would be lifted out of his coffin. Why did he even think up this stupid contest?" The girl tried to shout out the raging scream of the clockwork. "You know what I like." Nina couldn't resist teasing the bride. "It's a very romantic pageant." "Don't you think so?" she asked Violetta. Leaning over to her face, there was a look of confusion in the bride's eyes. If she wanted to say something nasty to Nina, after the alarm clock rang, she definitely forgot about it. Nina couldn't sleep the whole night after that. She could not rest for an antique alarm clock in the hands of a rich groom. It was clear that such a thing in a second hand. And then what? Probably now it is gathering dust somewhere in his closet, and the young rich man won't even remember it anymore. After spending the night like that, Nina decided to find out as much as her gut told her about the alarm clock. It's not that simple here. Ironically, the only person who could shed any light at all on what was going on lived in a luxurious country mansion, which could be reached only by calling a cab. She got up at dawn or dusk, but she couldn't sleep any more. Lying in bed for nothing until dinner, she Miranda ga not like. She began to pack for her little trip. It was the girl's day off that day, so she could be sure that she would certainly not be called to the restaurant. When she took a cab to the cottage village where young Alexander and his wife lived, Nina was somewhat confused. At the entrance gate, she was not greeted in a friendly way. The gods who flatly refused to let the girl enter the estate. Then Nina decided to cheat. She had always dreamed of trying her hand as a reporter as a child, so why not do it now, even if it was just for fun? I didn't want to introduce myself right away, of course. The guards looked at each other but shook their heads in the negative. Our media is exclusively dedicated to interviewing the city's not most important people. Alexander personally invited me to a meeting today. He and his wife want to give our publication an exclusive interview. Then why didn't they warn us about it? I asked in a stern voice. We would have had orders this morning to let you through. Nina did not know what to answer. Of course, we could take a risk and go to the bank. But what would happen if she was found out? However, she did not have much choice in the matter. In case you are not aware, exclusivity implies careful preservation and confidentiality of all the material gathered in the course of the conversation. Neither had her beautiful sunglasses on over her eyes, and her driver's license, though quite cheap, looked on her face. Simply stunning. With those sunglasses, even in the most casual clothes, jeans and a t-shirt with a jacket left on top of them, Nina easily made an impression of a person of style and quite fit into all the interiors here. A sort of young designer, Shelley art programmer who happened to leave her respectable home to the nearest supermarket for avocados and cream for breakfast. Strangely enough, the girl's plan worked. Reluctantly, but still agreed to open the gate and then inform the owner of the house about the arriving guests. He had not, but was ready to give a run straight through the woods, as Alexander was very surprised that immediately after the wedding to visit him a journalist, and even from the publication, the name of which does not tell him anything. Nevertheless, I was lucky. The young heir agreed to receive her, although he did not immediately recognize the casually dressed Nina as the dishwasher from the restaurant. "Wait, I saw you yesterday." Alexander smiled, puzzled. "Only forgive my curiosity. How do you manage to combine two such different professions? Or have you been working in the restaurant, as they call it, undercover?" Didn't feel he was blushing. "Excuse me, Alexander. I'm very embarrassed, but pretending to be a journalist. It was my only chance to get here." The girl said with her head down. "And why are you here?" The young businessman frowned. Nina did not know how to start a conversation without looking downright pathetic and ridiculous. "A little less a second," she did say. "Alexander, I don't know if this might seem strange to you, but it's very important for me to know where you got that antique alarm clock that you used as a timer for yesterday's contest." Alexander looked sincere, surprised but answered calmly. "This alarm clock has always been in my family, for as long as I can remember. Actually, it belongs to my father, and even before that it was my grandfather's property. Originally, there were like two pairs of these alarm clocks. I don't remember exactly what happened, but one of them seems to have disappeared. It was a very expensive piece, made in a single copy by German watchmakers over 100 years ago. My father told me that my grandfather found these alarm clocks in Berlin, bought them back at a private auction." Nina looked up, and hope flashed in the girl's eyes. "You see, I'm asking for a reason. The fact is that my father once gave exactly the same alarm clock to my grandfather. And then he disappeared for many years. I still don't know if he's still alive, but it seems to me that your alarm clock and ours are connected in some specific way." "That's just how." Alexander looked at Nina carefully and realized that she wasn't lying. Otherwise, he would have seen it long ago. It was not for nothing that he was one of the best psychologists in his father's staff. Any person was like an open book to him. And Alexander Jr. often used this advantage of his when it came to making deals profitable for their family company. "I don't even know how I can help you," Alexander shrugged, looking at the girl with sincere sympathy, "except that you can meet him personally in my presence, of course, and ask him anything you are interested in." "Oh my God, that would be wonderful," Nina exclaimed happily. "Thank you for your understanding, Alexander. Forgive me once again." The young millionaire peacefully, "Don't thank me." In the end, I wondered myself, what could be the connection between these alarm clocks? Here's just the guy's cryptic expression. "Let's keep this meeting between us, okay? My father is out of town, but he'll be back in a couple of days. I'll call you then. She's on her way." Nina was a little upset that she couldn't meet the young businessman's father right away, but she nodded obediently. "Do not think. It has nothing to do with you," Alexander assured her. "It's all about my wife. He is extremely suspicious, and the slightest thing runs to complain to his parents." Alexander immediately turned sullen. "My wife's mother and father are very influential, but also dangerous people. Dad decided on this marriage only to strengthen the business. Otherwise, our corporations would have eaten up their companies. So you married your fiancé without love? Nina asked him in amazement, but then she immediately realized. Oh, I'm sorry. That's so tactless of me. Nothing, he laughed shortly. But you act exactly as any self-respecting journalist would do in your place, seeking out those hot stories and asking the right questions. Nina looked down and felt terribly ashamed and uncomfortable again. Alexander, however, seemed not the least bit embarrassed by such things. Yes, I did not marry for great love. However, this does not prevent us from interacting as good partners and friends. Modern relationships are complicated. Nina, sometimes even what starts out as a very profitable business deal can develop into something more, something akin to real feelings. At any rate, I'd really like to believe that. The landlord finished talking, but offered Nina a coffee before she left. Now Violetta was not at home, and the girl could not be afraid of anything. However, she refused. She was so embarrassed that she accidentally led a 5-minute millionaire to such a frank conversation. A couple of days later, as promised, Alexander himself dialed Nina and invited her to come to their home again. After escorting the guest to her father's office, the young man remained standing nearby. He was very curious about the whole story, but as soon as Nina looked at Alexander's father, her eyes went dark in an instant. At the table, in a lavish business suit and with an elegant haircut, sat her own father. He wasn't. At that moment, it seemed as if everything was about to start spinning in some kind of crazy waltz. Daddy, you don't recognize me. It's me, your Nina. Tears were already glistening in the girl's eyes. Her heels rustled. Excitement flared up in her soul. Daddy, why did you leave us then? She continued to ask the man, the dishwasher. Why did you leave me all alone? After all, we loved you. And me and Grandma, and even Grandma, and even Grandpa Donald. To her surprise, her father appeared completely indifferent to her. Instead, he looked from her to his son, Alexander, and back again. Young lady, what are you talking about? I've never seen you before in my life. We've never even met. What kind of father am I to you? Then he looked more sternly at Alexander. Son, did you bring me a crazy woman? Don't you see? The girl's clearly not in good mental health. She thought I was her father. Oh man, Jimmy shook his head. And Nina only now realized that Father Alexander had a completely different name. And this man's facial expression, despite the uncanny resemblance to her birth father, was a little different. God, I'm sorry. I'm afraid I was mistaken, Nina muttered fearfully. Alexander, on the other hand, rushed to defend her in front of her father. She's not crazy, Dad. It's all because of your alarm clock. And Alexander told the businessman the whole story of Nina from the beginning. But it makes a difference, of course. Jimmy nodded at the end of the conversation. Look, Nina, I don't know what any of this means, but I think I'm the one who should be looking for a clue here. After all, both alarm clocks belong to my family. Arranging to let her know as soon as he learned something new, Jimmy went to his own father, Drake. He lived not far from his son and grandson in a small cottage, Wright style. Upon learning that he was not only an exact replica of Nina's father, but also owned the exact same alarm clock, he became interested in him. The situation was extremely strange, and his father was the only one who could help them here, as he had worked all his life as a watchmaker. Nina's and their family's alarm clocks were once very valuable pieces. In the collection of Ivan Arsenovich, Ivan's son, Alexander, when he asked him to clarify the whole situation. I see it's time for me to tell you all about you. Grandpa thought for a while before he continued. You see, it just so happens that I wasn't allowed to have any children of my own in this life. I had the mumps, and so for a long time I thought I was something of a failure, until I met Veronica Miranda. This woman was pregnant, 2 doubles, but she agreed to give me 1 baby. For financial help, of course, She was physically unable to pull too. Her husband was dead, and there was hardly any money at home. So I took you right after you were born. That's what happened to the second boy. I don't know. How could he have gotten your alarm clock? Jimmy was surprised. But theoretically, your twin could have gotten his watch through the black market. It was stolen from me a long time ago by a negligent maid. She looked like an honest gypsy, a confident trickster. She persuaded me to give her the alarm clock to show such beauty to her sick children. Well, I bought it, the old fool. I haven't seen her or my alarm clock since, until today. Alexander was shocked by what he heard, but he didn't blame him after all. Now he knew for sure that he had a sibling. And Alexander, sir, set a noble goal to find him, and thereby help at the same time his niece, who turned out to be Nina. After informing the girl about everything, the millionaire immediately raised all his connections and began to dig earth in search of the necessary information. What was his surprise when Donald was eventually found serving time in a distant prison? On their private plane, Jimmy, Alexander, and Nina arrived at their destination very quickly, having struggled to get the warden of the area to see Donald. The whole company looked forward to hearing his version of events. Be that as it may, her own father was alive, except that Donald himself, alas, was not feeling very well. The harsh conditions had taken their toll on his body, but he still decided to fight for life, seeing his beloved daughter. Nina, daughter, forgive me if you can. Almost crying, the skinny man told her when they were all allowed to go out together. I didn't expect it to turn out this way when I went to town. The man squeezed his daughter's hands harder, but the guard looked at him expressively, and Donald had to let the girl out of his arms. It all began. When I got in touch with this grudge, my eyes, then she didn't see it, the father spat angrily. She was a swindler, a con artist, but beautiful. Anyway, she charmed me to no end. I'm sorry, my daughter. But your mother was dead by then, so I couldn't resist the temptation for long. Nina looked at her father understandingly, and he continued, and she did not want to move to the village. She needed expensive clothes, jewelry, her own apartment in Moscow. That's when she got a job as a maid to a well-to-do man stealing one of his alarm clocks. She offered to sell it on the black market, but I was sorry to part with it, so I decided to give it to my grandfather. He loved that kind of thing. It was also my thanks to him for the fact that he and I actually raised you, while I was doing who knows what with that woman. The man rubbed his eyes, probably out of the family, not interrupting him, expecting to hear more. I, when that alarm clock went off, went right back to the idea. But she'd already messed with some glasses at that point and wanted to rob a very rich house. I was like a fool, completely blinded, and out of love, I was ready to follow her to the ends of the earth. But she knew how to persuade a man. There's nothing to be said for that. Then I got caught in that very robbery. The case went all over the country at the time, but my name never came up. And how could I write to your grandparents Nin about it? Not only were they with you the whole time I was robbing, but now they had to suffer the shame of my foolishness. So I made up my tenor. I'm going to sit here like a righteous man, and then I'm going to get out with a clear conscience. After that, he looked at me and held out. But what I didn't know for sure was that I had a brother who was also a twin of my father's. You and I are so much alike. I spent my whole childhood in an orphanage. My mother died early. I was only 3 years old. The fever burned her out after a moment's silence. Now, of course, I no longer feel anything for that abomination, and there's nothing left for me to do. A year will go by quickly and you won't notice. When I get home, I'll come straight to you.